So in today's video, we're going to be covering 9.2, which is radical reconstruction. This is the second of 4 sections in chapter 9. Like I said, pretty short. So if you want to follow along as I go through it, it starts on page 499. As we talked about in 9.1, Reconstruction is the time period that happens after the Civil War. They call it Reconstruction because they're trying to make the South fit back into the United States and become one country again. Now, just because the war ended, like we talked about last time, doesn't necessarily mean that the South loses all their feelings about everything. So, for example, how they feel about people of color or how they feel about slavery or all that stuff doesn't necessarily change just because the war ended. So the period of Reconstruction is really trying to make it so that the country is whole again and that everybody follows the same rules. Okay, so radical Reconstruction, putting the term radical in front of it, just means that it's kind of a harsher, more severe, important kind of Reconstruction that's going to take place, and it's a time period in the United States history. Excuse me. Okay. So rights and restrictions in the South. So even though Congress passed laws like the 13th Amendment that said that slavery is now illegal, that's fine. Okay, the southern states passed that. However, they start to create laws called things like black codes. Okay, these black codes are created to prevent people of color from having certain rights that white people do have. For example, even though they're free now legally, okay, states in the South pass laws so people of color can't vote. They can't do certain things to try and keep them out of politics because remember, if people get into politics, you have a better chance of getting yourself right. So they don't want those African American or people of color to be able to get into politics. So they keep them. They don't let them vote. They can't do certain things, certain kinds of property they can't own. Okay, they can't own guns, things like that. Okay, so they pass these codes in the South so that people of color are still not on the same level, even though they're legally free. Okay, they can't vote, like I said earlier. That's really the most important one. Because of this, okay, people in the North get upset. The idea of the 13th Amendment and the Civil War was so that people of color could have almost as many rights as those people who are white males in the country at this time. Okay, now certainly people in the North we talked about before don't necessarily want people of color to have all the rights, right? Because it still matters to them as far as jobs and things like that. But they want them to be able to vote. They want them to be able to, own guns if you're a citizen, to be able to do all those types of things, to go to school. Okay, they want those things. So because that the South makes laws to stop these things, even though African Americans are free, all right, it really makes the North upset. The North starts what's called radical Reconstruction, okay, or it turns radical. And what that means is now they're going to start doing their best to force Reconstruction on the South. The South doesn't want to go along with it, so now the North is going to force it upon them, okay? In this, there's a few things that kind of incite this. Obviously, the laws we talked about. There were a few riots in the South where, for example, a few small groups of black males were trying to advocate for themselves to be able to vote, and they were met by large groups of white people with violence. Okay, and they were beaten and sometimes killed and things like that. So, of course, this upsets people in the North, and that happened in New Orleans. Okay, because these people are upset, they start to reform radical Reconstruction in Congress. If you want to make laws that change the way people are treated, you have to do it in Congress. Okay, you can protest and do all that stuff all you want. Okay, but if you want to make laws, you have to be in Congress. So in order to get that radical Reconstruction going, the Republicans know that they have to get into Congress, and the way to do that is to get voted in. Okay, so Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania, all right, he's kind of the leader of radical Reconstruction. He's the one who comes up with this idea. He says that it's not going well enough. We're not doing this fast enough. We need to do it now. Okay, so he says that we're going to do anything we can politically to try and get these Republicans voted in. We need them in the House of Representatives. We need them in the Senate so we can make as many laws as possible as fast as we can to help these people of color out. Okay, so they start to do what's called legislative reform. They really have two goals, okay, these radical Republicans, or radical Reconstructionists, you could call them. First of all, they want to get rid of the power that was given to the plantation owners in the South. The plantation owners in the South are the rich farmers, and they've pretty much run the South for a really long time. Radical Reconstructionists want them gone. Okay, the second thing they want is they want freedmen, okay, those people of color who are now free, they want them to be able to vote. So those are the two big goals. Get rid of the power in the plantation owners, give power to vote to African American men. Okay, those are their two big goals. And in order to do this, they have to, like I said, do it legislatively or in the legislative branch to make laws. So they start what's called legislative reform. Radicals need the support of moderate Republicans. Now, as you're going to find out as you get older, okay, in any form of politics, if you have a radical person from the left or a radical person from the right, that doesn't make up a very large number of people. So in this case, radical Reconstructionists, there's not a lot of them. There are enough, but not a lot. Okay, if it was just radical Reconstruction people voting on things, they couldn't win. They need the support of other Republicans, okay, people who aren't quite as severe or as radical as those people in order to get what they want done. So the radical Reconstructionists who are Republicans need the Republicans who are a little more less radical to also vote with them. Okay, so that's what they do in Congress, and they need to get this. Now, these two people don't necessarily think, or these two groups of people don't necessarily think a lot alike. Okay, the radicals are like, we need to do a lot of stuff right now, and the other Republicans are like, yeah, we want to help the African American people, but we don't need to do it so severely. Okay, so they got to try and get on the same page. However, they do share one common idea, and that is helping people of color vote. So they kind of work based off that. They both want the same thing to kind of work together a little bit. Okay, they work together to pass what's called the 14th Amendment. Okay, and they start creating these laws. The 14th Amendment is going to help pass those laws, because what they're doing is they're passing these laws that kind of make the black codes go away. But Andrew Johnson, who's the president, he doesn't necessarily want the black codes to go away because he's from the South. Okay, so he kind of vetoes them. Well, that doesn't help, or he vetoes the laws, or he doesn't stop those black codes that make black people not be able to vote. Okay, so Congress is trying to figure out what they can do to get around this right now, because Andrew Johnson is not helping. Okay, so the 14th Amendment, created by Congress, now that it's got a lot of Republicans in it, is pretty much says that you can't stop somebody based on voting as long as they're a citizen, which is all persons born or naturalized in the United States. So it's pretty much saying that citizens is anybody who's born or naturalized in the United States, which qualifies any of those African American or people of color who were born in the United States, or naturalized, which means like 7 or 14 years, depending how long they're looking at it this time. Okay, so that pretty much, if they're a citizen, they're able to vote. Okay, so that's what this law does. Now it gets all the way to the president, like we talked about, Andrew Johnson, he vetoes it. Now, what is able to happen, though, okay, is because they have enough of those Republican people in Congress, they can override the president's veto with 2/3, and they do that. Okay, so the 14th Amendment does end up passing, but it takes 2 years in order to get ratified. Okay, 2 years. Those are not the only problems. Obviously, there's political and social problems during Reconstruction. Social problems are like the problems between people in the community, and political problems are obviously problems in politics. Okay, so like we talked about, President Johnson encourages former states, because remember, like 2/3 of states have to ratify an amendment, which means approve it in order for it to become part of the Constitution. He is telling those states, do not sign it, don't do this stuff, because remember, he's from the South. He doesn't necessarily want those African American people to vote. He's always telling people, or states, not to sign this ratification. In fact, he makes it part of the Senate and House of Representatives election in 1866. So he's not up for a re-election, but a lot of senators and a lot of House of Representative members are in 1866. And he tries to make it part of the election. You know, vote for these people because we don't want this bill to pass. We don't want it to ratify, all that stuff. What ends up blowing up on him, because it actually goes backwards. People prove, okay, that the Northern people want this amendment to pass, so therefore they vote for the Republican people. And actually, the Southern people think that they don't get enough representative in government. So they have this idea that they're going to protest it by not going to vote. Okay, the Democrats are not going to vote to the polling offices to vote because they feel like they don't have enough say. Well, all that does is let all the Republican people in the South vote. So therefore, of course, the Republican people or the Republican politicians win the Southern elections. Okay, so that really does not help Democratic people in the South because they decided to protest voting. Now they have Republican people running their states, which really lets radical Reconstruction go here, because now the House and the Senate are pretty much primarily controlled by Republicans, so they can pass any bill through that they want and get it to the president, and then when he vetoes it because he doesn't like it, they just override it anyways. Okay, so it really, really helps the Republican side because the Southern Democrats decide to protest voting by not going to vote. That doesn't work, okay? It gives the Republicans all the power. The first thing they do is they pass what's called the Reconstruction Act, and it pretty much makes the South really unhappy. Okay, the Reconstruction Act, passed by radical Reconstructionists in Congress and Republicans, breaks the South into 5 military districts, and they actually send the military to run the South because the South is doing all these things to make people of color not have the rights that they should, even though they are legally supposed to. They are free people. They are citizens. Therefore, they have the right to vote. They have the right to own property. They have the right to own guns, all that stuff. However, the South says no. So now they pass what's called, like I said, the Radical Reconstruction Act, which breaks the South into 5 districts. It's run by a military general in each district. Okay, so in that military general in each district pretty much has the authority to do whatever they want. Okay, so they have a lot of trials without juries. They have all that kind of stuff that pretty much, if you don't agree with what's going on and you live in the South, they're going to put you in jail. Okay, that's the way it was run. And the reason that they do this is because the South was not following these rules. Okay, give the people their rights and this wouldn't happen. Well, the South chose not to give those people their rights, so now they're under military control. Now, of course, the South does not like this. Okay, they're arguing we just became part of the country again, and now you're breaking all of our rights by putting us under military control, which is against our rights. They probably had a point. However, the North ends up doing it anyways because they say it's for the greater good and for those people who are having their rights taken away from them. Those people, of course, being people of color. Okay, so it's kind of a debacle we have going on in the South right now where nobody's happy. The military's there controlling them because they won't follow the rules, so that way people of color can get the things they're supposed to. Okay, it's really not a good situation in the South. Which brings us to our next point. Okay, of course, Andrew Johnson is not happy with this situation either. He's the president. So, although he can't make the military not do this, right? Because they passed a law that said the military has to, the legislative branch did. He can fire generals. So he does all he can. He's firing generals that he knows are for Reconstruction. He's putting people in charge that he thinks might do what he wants, but these generals still do have to follow the laws that were passed by the legislative branch. So it helps a little bit, but they still have to do kind of what the legislative branch said. Because he's trying so hard to stop these laws from being effective, okay, Congress tries to impeach the president, okay? They try to impeach Andrew Johnson. They say that we're going to make him we're going to put him on trial for not doing his job. A president can be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, okay? Well, they get into this trial, right? We're going to try the president because he's pretty much doing his best to make our laws not work. Well, during the trial, okay, even some of the senators are like, this is pretty political because what they find is Andrew Johnson never broke any laws. He never did anything that he wasn't supposed to, okay? Andrew Johnson has the power to choose military commanders as the president. So he was really doing everything that he could legally do. So because of this, they end up they impeach him, but they end up voting, the Senate votes that he gets to keep his presidency. He's not out of office because he never broke any laws, okay? And throughout the history of the United States, we've had a few impeachment hearings for presidents, and there's never been a president who's actually lost, okay? So this being the first. Andrew Johnson was impeached, but he did not lose the trial. He won the trial because they said he didn't do anything illegal. All right. However, he gets to finish up the next few months of his presidency. He runs for presidency again. He does not win. Instead, it's pretty much an overwhelming victory for the Republican candidate, who is Ulysses S. Grant. Remember the general that was put in charge during the Civil War that pretty much finished it and won it for the North. He becomes president for the Republican candidate because they believe that he'll do kind of what they want as far as giving people of color rights and moving the country forward. Okay. The next thing they're going to do is pass what's called the 15th Amendment. All right, it forbids any state, okay, from denying citizens the right to vote because of the color of their skin, their race, or previous condition of servitude. And what that means is this 15th Amendment says that states can't make it so you can't vote because you are an African American, because you used to be a slave, or because you are some other race, okay, that is not a white male. Now, of course, that doesn't include Native Americans at this time. Native Americans are treated very, very poorly. They are not given any rights. Even under the 14th Amendment, which says any person that was born in the United States gets to vote, they don't fall under that one either. So Native Americans are not treated well at this time. But the 15th Amendment says that you can't be denied the right to vote because of your race or previous condition of servitude, meaning you used to be a slave. However, southern states find ways to get around this, and we'll talk about it next section more, but kind of a quick preview into it. They do things like they pass what's called a literacy test. So in order to be able to vote, you have to be able to read a really, really hard passage and know what it means. Okay, and remember that slaves were not